Confidence, the podcast dedicated to helping you unlock the power of effective public speaking. I'm Tim Newman, a recovering college professor turned communication coach, and I'm thrilled to guide you on a journey to becoming a powerful communicator. I want to thank each and every one of you for your support. It truly means the world to me. If you have questions or if you want something covered on the podcast, send me a message. Please visit timnewmanspeaks.com to get your free ebook, The Top 21 Challenges for Public Speakers and How to Overcome Them. Today's guest is Joanne Merrick. Joanne brings over 25 years of global experience in leadership development, having delivered transformative programs across 22 countries and 5 continents. As founder of The Leadership Recipe, she helps individuals and teams enhance communication, emotional intelligence, and performance. Her background spanning leadership roles at Deloitte, Amazon, and Juniper Networks fuels her fresh, neuroscience-driven approach. In her debut book, Game On, Is Management Your Best Career Play? She empowers professionals to make informed decisions about stepping into management roles. Joanne, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you on today.
Thank you so much, Tim. It's great to be here. When you say 5 continents and 22 countries, that's a lot of frequent flyer points.
It is, and that's where I really wanted to start with you. I mean, you've lived in all parts of the world. Um, how has that changed how you view communication and leadership, or has it changed?
Oh, it totally has. My accent, for listeners that might be wondering by now, my accent is Australian, so I like to point that out. Otherwise, they're wondering what my accent is, and they're not really listening to anything I'm saying. Ask me how I know. Yes, so I left Australia about 17 years ago, and I moved to Hong Kong, of all places. I lived there for 3.5 years, and that was a real transition for me, even though at that point I'd spent a lot of time training and traveling in and around Asia and all parts of Asia, from India, Japan, China, Thailand, you name it. It was still, a surprise for me. It was still a definite kind of culture shift from what I had been used to in Australia. And then to move from Hong Kong to where I'm now in the US, I've been here for about 13 years now. Again, it's a different culture. We speak the same language, but it's a very different culture here in the US from what it is in Australia. And I think the biggest lesson for me in those moves has been, how do I integrate myself into other cultures as quickly as I possibly can? And to do that, I find something in common with folks as quickly as I possibly can. And I also believe that the onus is on the communicator to be understood. It's not me expecting them to understand me. My responsibility is absolutely to be understood. And I truly believe that that's important in the realm of management that I know we're going to talk about today as well. But it's my responsibility to get my message across, to be accountable for the impact that I'm having. And that's been, I think, one of the biggest lessons from living in a couple of different countries.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because as we talked before we came online here, you know, knowing yourself and knowing how you communicate. First you have to know who you are, but it's not about you; it's about your audience, and knowing them and making sure that you're doing what you can so that they can understand you and kind of get where you're coming from. And we're going to get a little bit more in depth into that, because you did some really good work from a neuroscience perspective that um, I, I'm fascinated by.
Right.
But one of your roles was with Amazon, and were you the person that was in charge of professional development for all of Amazon, or for a specific division? Explain kind of what you did.
Sure. I was initially hired. I lived in California at the time in San Jose. I was initially hired to look after learning and development for Lab 126, which is the devices function, for one of a better word. That's the group that had, when I went there, they had just launched the Alexa. Do you remember the
Okay.
the Tower
Oh, yes.
Alexa?
Mhm.
And this was also the group that was responsible for the rollout and creation of the Kindle, which was
Okay.
also one of my favorite tools. I actually still have one of the, if not the, I think it's maybe the second edition Kindle that ever came on the market.
Oh,
very proud of that ancient tool now. But I was always fascinated by the fact that you could get a whole book on one device,
Yeah.
or a number of books on one device. So I felt destined to go to that organization. I was very fortunate to work there for about 3.5 years. It was about 12,500 people, ultimately under my stewardship, around about 2,000 managers, all up, that we were educating all around the world. So that was a wonderful career move for me, and a fantastic organization. Great experiences there.
So what were some of your challenges in terms of training and development, with a team that big, again, based all around the world? What were some of the challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome them, specifically from that communication and management leadership perspective?
I think you really need to work with the business to find out what the business needs from a learning and leadership development
Mhm.
perspective. You need to build relationships with leadership within that organization. They need to know what value you might add to their respective functions or their respective businesses within the broader business. And then, of course, you need to deliver to 'em like anything
Yes,
else, right? It's like,
exactly.
"This is what I believe I can do, and this is what I'm going this is what I want to do, this is what I'm planning to do." Get their buy-in every step of the way.
Right.
And I think initially building those relationships with the leadership and then delivering on what you say you're gonna do is a really important element, really important to my success anyway.
The buy-in is so important. Like you said, I was at a conference last week, and we were just having kind of a roundtable talk, and I, I talked about how I accomplished something, a number of years ago, which some places are doing, some places aren't, and the question was, how did I do that? And I got into the nuts and bolts of it, and halfway through, I said, first off, number, we have to stop because I missed the most important step.
Mm,
We have to have the buy-in.
right.
Because it doesn't work if we don't have the buy-in. If I didn't have everybody on the team buying into this, it wasn't gonna work, and sometimes buy-in happens right away, and sometimes it takes a little bit of time. Once you show, that what you're doing and what you're talking about is actually gonna work, that's how, how buy-in happens. But if you don't have buy-in, it doesn't matter how good your idea is, or how good that how beneficial that change is gonna be,
Mm.
it's not gonna work.
Absolutely, and I think there's a real opportunity to be innovative around what you can deliver,
Mhm.
like by speaking and engaging and getting the buy-in of other folks. And an example of that was, there was a particular area of the business that was that had principal engineers. These are
Mhm.
people that have got at least one PhD, maybe maybe many more. They've worked really hard throughout their career. They're crazy, smart people, and they work with a lot of other teams of individuals, whether they're reporting directly to them or that they just have influence
Right.
over. They're not part of the formal structure. And one thing the business was noticing was that these people were great managers and leaders, but they felt that they needed to come up with all of the solutions
Mhm.
themselves. They felt that they needed to come up with all of the ideas because they were often literally the smartest person in the room. So what their leadership wanted to do was have me train them in how to bring about innovative thought
Mhm.
in others. So we had a program we called Coaching for Development, which we were rolling out internally across the organization. So what I did was, rather than deliver that program, I tweaked it up a little bit, added a few components, and called the program Coaching for the Development of Ideas. And we ran that across the principal network. And it was a fantastic way to train really, really smart people to have better conversations, to be more
Right.
kind of inclusive, to be more curious about
Mhm.
what their teams brought to the table, the ideas their teams brought to the table, and for them ultimately to not really feel like they had to come up with all the solutions themselves. In fact, they realized at the end of it all that they could actually get better solutions from engaging and interacting with their teams.
Yeah.
So it was a win-win for everyone, But that was an example of a program that required a little bit of innovation, lots of conversation and collaboration with the leadership, and was really about solving a real business problem.
Mhm. And you giving up control or and I'm not I don't even know that control is the right word, giving up the whole idea that everything rests on your shoulders, and if you don't have the solution, then it's gonna fall apart. That's that's a tough obstacle to overcome, especially for, those people that are that smart, are generally the type A personalities that are generally the ones that, have always had, the ideas, have always been able to communicate their ideas, and that's one of the reasons why they get into those positions, and now you're asking them to give up some of that. That's a big ask.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not easy, but they need to see the light at the end of
Mm,
the tunnel
yeah,
and know that it's not a train coming in the opposite direction, right? They need to see the benefit in the collaboration, the communication, the engagement, the influence, the bringing about of ideas in other people for the betterment of themselves
right,
and obviously their functions and the business. So it's a personal journey that they need to go through as well. And that's why we would often run programs that went over, maybe a 2, 3 day period.
mhm,
Not all day, obviously, but 2 or 3
right,
days. We've still got to get our jobs done. But it was an engaging experience for them that they engaged in together with their leaders.
right,
And that I think is another important component of building learning and development functions within organizations
right,
is to get the full leadership on board. And even if the higher leaders, know about, how to give feedback appropriately or how to communicate or how to, set visions or how to set goals or whatever. They've done it before. They've attended training maybe before in their careers.
mhm,
But to be involved in those kinds of programs with their teams
yeah,
has this powerful, really engaging element to it,
mhm,
and it's a win-win for their teams, and it's also a win-win for the leaders because they get to see their teams function under a completely different light, and they're all learning the same thing, right? They start singing from the same hymn book, so to speak, and they create a language, they communicate in a way
mhm,
that just becomes ultimately more efficient and more effective because they've all been part of the same experience.
right. And it builds trust. It builds
Oh,
trust
absolutely.
trust from the leadership to the team that shows that they trust them to do what they need to do, and and that they're gonna have the ownership or the buy-in, and it trusts the team with the leaders that if something doesn't work, it's not gonna blow up in their face.
That's right.
They're working through these issues and problems together, success comes together, and, it really does take, the entire team to take it to the next level.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Um, and we talk about communication most of the time, from us speaking, right? But there are so many other aspects of good communication that's critical, such as listening and nonverbal, facial expressions, body language, etc.
Yeah.
What have you noticed in your career that people could use some help on in terms of good communication? And what have you noticed from people that do it really well?
I think the people that do it really well, there's a congruence between what they're saying,
Mhm.
what their faces are expressing, what their bodies are
Right.
showing at the same time. There's this congruence between those elements that enables the person that they're communicating with to kind of feel at ease, to feel comfortable, to feel valued, to really feel the trust, as you mentioned before, and kind of they're literally more capable of opening up and engaging and having a better conversation. The biggest challenge that I've found with a lot of leaders, especially new managers, they're not as self aware potentially around what is going on with their body
Uh,
physically while they're having conversations with other people. And, the classic example is when you're sitting across from someone and you're kind of face to face to them, but their body is sideways, or they're looking out the window half the time rather than looking at at you, or they've got their arms folded in front of their
Right.
chest, kind of like a self-protection, kind of mode. I have encouraged leaders to, as uncomfortable as they might be in the moment, right? They might feel like closing down, having facing a different direction from the person that they're talking to. They may feel like they want to do that, but they can't, because their main aim is to communicate effectively and to have the other person feel comfortable in engaging and communicating with them. So they need to do whatever they can do, especially as it relates to their own body language, to enable that increased level of comfort in the person that they're communicating with. And it's hard for some people.
Yeah, I see that, and how much do you think that transfers over to, the younger professionals and how they learn how to communicate in terms of, when they move up into those types of positions or when they have to have tough conversations or that, okay, so, you know, I've been in this type of scenario 5 times, and 4 of those times, this is how the person who was in that role acted, so that's probably, my go-to as well.
Yeah, I think it starts with self-awareness and being
Mm,
curious around how the impact that you're having on other people. And I'm a huge advocate of 360 assessments, especially for managers and new managers as they're starting to learn a trade. And it is a trade, it is a learnable trade.
yes,
To be a great manager, it's not something that necessarily comes naturally to everyone, but it is something that can be learned. And the impact that managers have on other people is a significant element of the role. And you can have a fantastic impact on other people, but you can also have a horrible impact
right,
on other people as well. So if you're choosing to become a manager, you need to be open to learning about what it is you're doing well in your role, what's working about your communication style, but also what's not going well and maybe what's not working in your communication style, and then adjust it and
right.
be open to adjusting it.
And I love the idea of the 360 evaluations, the Myers-Briggs, Discus, those types of assessments as well, because, you know, you as a team member can learn how, your coworker or your manager or leader thinks, and they same with you, and then you can kinda mold your interactions to get the best out of them from that perspective.
Absolutely. And I've in communicating with others myself, I've also kind of made a lot of assumptions that what I'm saying is actually what's being heard.
Right,
And then they might reflect back to me what I said in an active listening kind of sequence, because that's what they've been taught to do, right?
right,
So they actively listen and they do that really well. And they do reflect what I said, but they don't necessarily reflect what I meant.
right,
So that means that I've absolutely miscommunicated. There's an equation out there for the engineers that might be listening, that your intent of what you communicate or what you want to communicate needs to equal your impact.
right.
And if it's not, then there's something wrong with how you're communicating it. And it's up to you to do something about fixing that. And being open to people's feedback, being open to understanding that what you say is not necessarily how it might be interpreted by other people, and adjusting that along the way is the way that we learn.
Y Yeah, and it kinda makes me think, and I've said this a number of times, I don't think, especially from the younger professional perspective, they spend enough time thinking about who they are as individuals, you know
Right.
what their values are, um, how they think, how they come to make decisions, uh, what they like, what they don't like, et cetera, especially from a professional perspective, and that that really does inform how they communicate as well, because if they don't know, it comes back to the idea of being self-aware or the idea of emotional intelligence.
Right. Absolutely. And it's been if they want to be a manager, I believe the onus is on them
Yes.
to be more curious than ever about what impact they're having on other people, because managers, just in the very nature of the role, have a responsibility to do that because of the significant impact they have on other people.
Right, right. And is this where the whole idea of the idea of neuroscience comes into play, and understanding how we react to those types of situations?
I think neuroscience came about for me back in 2010 or 2011. I was introduced to the concept of neuroscience as it relates to leadership and management. And what I loved about it when I first started to hear of it was that a lot of what I'd been teaching by this point, for 10 or 15 years, was now backed by science. I'd been teaching philosophies and approaches by really respected individuals like Stephen Covey and Ken Blanchard and, many others that had a significant impact on the leadership and management development realm. Now the science was there to back it up. And what I felt my obligation was, now that I had been introduced to this, was to make the science available to managers and leaders to help them be better managers
Right.
and leaders. And it resonated really well with especially with the engineering platform that I was working with, at the time. And Tim, I can give you an example if you like.
Yes.
When I was, one of the neuroscience tells us that autonomy, or having a sense of autonomy, is really important for the human brain. I mean, you can imagine yourself, right? When you feel like you're in control, when you feel like you have choices in front of you, you feel better.
Right.
You feel like you're valued, you feel like you're engaging better with others, you feel like you're in more control. And one of the lectures that I was partaking in when I was getting interested and certified in the topic was through the Middlesex University. We were having a conversation on autonomy and its impact on the human brain. And one of the gentlemen in the class told us a story about his son. And the story goes that he had been, partaking in all of these training programs himself, so knew the importance of autonomy. Autonomy for me was having a sense of choice, having a sense of control over a situation. He got home one night from work and his 4-year-old son was playing on the staircase in their home. And he greeted his son when he got home, and then he went to his kitchen and started helping his wife with dinner. It was time to eat dinner, so he called out to his son to, come to the dinner table to eat his dinner. The son was having so much fun on the staircase that he said, "No, Dad, I'm not doing that. I want to eat my dinner here on the stairs." Well, it was we've all been there, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So the father, part of their traditional values was to eat dinner at the dinner table. So the fact that his son didn't want to do that was kind of unacceptable. So he could have taken this kind of authoritarian power, control kind of approach to things, but he decided not to do that, given what he had learned. So he said to his son, "Okay, you must eat your dinner at the dinner table." Right. So he was setting expectations, very clear expectations up front. And he said, "But I tell you what, tonight, you don't have to sit at your normal seat at the dinner table. You can sit wherever you like. You pick the chair, you sit there, no problems." The son was interested. Why? Because even over such a simple scenario of eating dinner at the dinner table, the son all of a sudden had a choice as to
Right.
where he was going to sit and a sense of control over himself and the situation that he'd found himself in. But the father didn't stop there. He was really smart. He then said, "Okay, not only can you choose where you sit, but you can choose where daddy sits at the dinner table tonight. You can choose where mummy sits at the dinner table tonight." That kid was at that dinner table so quickly. Why? Because he had some control over his
Right.
parents over such a simple scenario. So, how do you translate that into a management scenario? I think there's a lot of managers out there that just like to tell their employees what to do. Tell them what to do, how to do it, when to do it. When, as we were kind of talking about before, if managers go to their team and say, "Hey, how might you start this particular, task?" Or "What might be your next couple of steps?" Or what ideas are you coming up with that as to how we might solve for this
Right.
problem, right? The minute you start asking those kinds of questions and engaging with your employees, being curious and open to what they've got to say,
Yeah.
automatically, not only may you come up with better ideas than you might have anticipated in the first place, but you've also got a team of people now with you completely on board
Mhm.
because they've got that autonomy.
Right.
You know, feeling micromanaged and the impact that it has on the human brain is it's just terrible, and maybe we can all relate to scenarios like that where we feel or have been micromanaged and how bad that can be.
Yeah. For me, micromanagement, that's instant infuriation.
Right.
Instant. I mean, it doesn't take long at all. You know, I look at it from the perspective of, to we've been hired for a reason. You know,
Yeah.
give us that opportunity to do what we do. Um, Obviously, under some constraints, there's maybe there's time limits, maybe there's budget limits, within those you know confines, but
Mm.
allow us to do it the way that we want to do it, and be productive from that perspective.
Yeah,
It's
just get out of their way.
exactly,
Just let
exactly
them be successful, let
right,
them do what you've hired them to do.
right,
I find it a refreshing approach, to be
right.
honest, Tim. It doesn't happen as often as I would like it to, to be honest. But when people start asking me questions and get curious about what I think, I just open up. I just think it's really refreshing and
You know,
wonderful.
I think it's kind of changing a little bit, at least from what I see.
Hmm.
Because I'm somebody that I ask a lot of questions. You know, in whatever scenario that I'm in, really to kind of to it's to clarify it, to see what's going on, for me to start thinking about whatever issue it is, and I'm somebody that allows people to just to do. You figure out the way that works best for you. What's your time frame? So if I say, we need to have this done by Thursday at noon, and it's Tuesday, you know, show me how you're going to get it done,
Right.
or do it. And if you don't get it done, then we'll sit down and have a conversation. Okay, what were your steps? How can I help you better to to meet those expectations? To get to where you need to be, but allowing people to, especially younger professionals today.
Mhm.
When I say instant aggravation or infuriation from being micromanaged, they're from my experience, they're the same way. Um,
Right.
they may not know how to do something, but give them an opportunity to kinda think it through. Give them an opportunity
Yeah.
to try different ways to come up with solving a solution, whatever it is that they're working on. And then if that doesn't work, sit down and help guide them and mentor them from that perspective.
Yeah, I think it's situational too. Like when you've got a new hire come into the organization, you may not necessarily immediately sit down and say, "Hey, so how do you think you should do this?" Or, what
Right,
you might need to give those kinds of people a little bit more guidance. But or if you have had someone who's reporting to you, and has been for quite some time, the last thing you're going to do is micromanage them
right.
because that's just going to put you both offside at the
Exactly,
end of the
exactly.
day. So it is, situational, but that's part of being a great manager is, I call it the manager antennae, like
Oh, yeah.
you got your antenna out there and you're a little bit more aware of what's going on with you and the impact and what you're doing to engage with other people, and you need to be adaptable and flexible in your style to enable them to thrive and get the most out of them in their employment, right? So it's a very different perspective from that of like an individual contributor who all they really need to do is worry about themselves,
Right,
what they're doing, what they've got to do, what projects they're working on, how they might go about engaging or completing those. Whereas when you're a manager, it's just like not about you anymore.
right.
It's about getting the most out of other people,
Of other people,
and
right.
about getting results and outcomes, sometimes in ways that or in situations where the people that are reporting to you don't want to do the work. or even wanna engaged in the project, So, there's a lot of complexity to being a great manager that, I feel a lot of people don't give due consideration to before jumping in
Right.
to the role. And, I think it's important for folks, individual contributors that are thinking about doing so to really be curious about the role and what the full end-to-end components of the role are.
Yeah, and I don't know how realistic this is, but, you know, I almost think it's our job as leaders and mentors um, to help and train the ones that aren't managers how to be managers before they even get there. This is the
Mhm,
process. These are the things, bring them into some relevant conversations. Uh, let's just take budgeting, for example.
mhm.
If you've never had to deal with a complex budget, bring them in and say, "Okay, here's the deal. Here's the big picture. Okay, these are the things I'm thinking about over here. This is what has to be done over here, and we need to bring in this much revenue, or we need to cut this much from the budget. These are the things that we're thinking about. How would you go about doing that? Or,
Yeah,
what are you thinking from your position? And understand that it's not always going to work out in our favor. You know,
right,
it may not work out for me this time, but if it's what's best for the team, if it's what's best for the organization, that is what it is, and we may get what we want next time. But bring them in and teach them some of or things that have to be thought about in terms of making those decisions.
right, yeah. You might have heard, of the 70-20-10 rule, that's out there, Tim, around adult education is that 70% of what we learn is actually on the job and engaging in what we do, 20% from coaches or mentors or other significant people in our lives. And, much to my chagrin as an educator,
Yeah,
only 10% of what we learn is in the classroom.
right,
However, that 10% is a really important component because
right.
you learn in, a management program what you need to do, how you need to do it in as a realistic, time frame or a realistic,
Right.
experience as the trainers can provide for you. And then, you go out to the world and, you engage in that. I call it like you have a toolkit of
Yes.
management skills, and you need to draw on that toolkit at any given time under any given circumstance. So there's a number of things that folks need to learn. But I do wonder, Tim, you might relate to this as well, that whatever happened to our apprenticeship culture?
Yes.
Plumbers, electricians, we would not let an electrician into our home unless they were fully certified,
Right.
right? They could just
Right.
do too much damage.
Right.
So, or a plumber or, whatever else for that matter. But, I think the way that they learn is possibly one of the best ways that adults do
Yes.
learn, like
Yes.
to your point, where you do a form of apprenticeship or you get insight or time with your manager where they engage with you on the management element or
Right.
management component, the pure management component of their role, and budgeting is a great example.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming from the education industry, where I spent the majority of my career, there is no training whatsoever for people that, number one, that are professors. Number two, that go
Right.
from being a professor into administration. Most of us weren't ever taught how to teach, but we're teaching.
Mhm. Mhm.
Most of us, as we go from being faculty into administration, have never managed anything outside of our own self, and now
Right?
we're in charge. First off, we're in charge of teaching students. It's kind of important, and then we're in
Mhm.
charge of managing faculty members and budgets and all these types of things with no idea how to do it, and we're just expected to do it well, and we wonder why some of the issues we have that we
Yep.
have them.
Make it up as we go along,
Yeah,
right? And
it's I it's bizarre. So, unless you have some innate skills of, you know, being able to analyze things and being able to, uh, manage people, I mean, you can have some of that, but you still need to learn. You still need to understand, human behavior. You still need to learn how to accomplish things, how to get that buy-in, how to manage budget. for
Yeah,
what the priorities are. What the president's priorities may not be what your priorities are, and
that's right.
and being able to communicate those types of things. And I think I think across the board, and obviously those types of things happen in private business as well. That
Mm.
most of the time the managers are people that have done their job really well. They're just promoted,
Yeah.
and and with no training or no skills, and we wonder why there's such turmoil.
Yeah, it's a completely different skill set.
Yes,
I would hope that there are some things that individual contributors can do in order to start growing and developing management and leadership skills while they're individual contributors. First of all, there's a number, if a lot of great companies offer fantastic training programs
yes,
for them, that's great. But also, there's a number of institutes out there, such as Harvard, that have online courses that are
mhm,
free. There are Udemy program. I mean, I'm not associated or affiliated with any of these, but I have found some fantastic free online programs that at least start opening the door to helping individual contributors understand what the skills are that they
right,
need to develop, and then start putting them into practice. Whether it's if it's in the working environment, fantastic, but a lot of people don't feel comfortable using or practicing some of those skills in the work environment. So start practicing them at home.
yes,
For example, facilitate a conversation with your family over an important topic,
like
um,
dinner, like
like a dinner, right?
yeah,
Yeah. Start doing, things like that, engaging your team, organizing events or functions, getting people together, getting feedback from them on how you're communicating. Have them watch your body language, for example, when you're communicating things. You know, engage with a safe community of
yes,
folks in developing these skills so that when and if you do become a manager, you're so much more practiced.
right,
And, we and when you become a manager, you still need to practice. I think the old adage, Tim, is practice amateurs practice to get things right, but professionals, they still practice, and that's to keep from getting things wrong.
exactly, exactly,
And this also lends itself to the neuroscience of things too. We're developing neural networks every single second of every single day, and those neural networks need to be um, created, recreated, and
recreated, refreshed,
recreated
and
over
right.
time and refreshed over time in order for them to become just a part of who we are.
And it's such an important point. I mentioned that I was at a conference last week, and what I talked about one of the things I talked about was, you know, being a recovering college professor, so I don't have the interaction with people that I used to.
Right.
The majority of my interaction is like this, and I said,
Mm.
I really miss that actual human face-to-face interaction, sitting down with somebody, shaking somebody's hand, um, being in a room with a group of people to be able to have a discussion where, these types of discussions are great, but there's really something different and special about, being in the same room with somebody and
Absolutely.
having those types of conversations. And if we don't do that on a regular basis, what does that do to our our, our levels of communication?
Mhm.
I mean, it's so much different. It's so much different having, let's just say we had 10 people in here. Having a conversation in here is very different than having a conversation with 10 people in a room.
Absolutely. It really is, and it's so important for potential managers to want to be in and around and engage with people
Yeah.
because that's the
That's
nature
what
of
you
the
do.
job, right?
Exactly.
That's what you do.
Exactly.
And, I completely get it. There are some people that feel less comfortable in that realm and some people that feel more comfortable. But again, it's a learnable skill.
Yeah.
So it's important, for potential managers to know that you'll need to be in front of people. You'll need to have difficult conversations from time to time.
Yes.
You'll need to think outside yourself. You'll need to, one of the opportunities that I think a lot of managers don't necessarily realize up front is that they, more than anyone else on the planet, I believe, have the opportunity to unleash potential, perspec- pers- particularly untapped potential
Right.
in their direct reports. And I think that that is possibly one of the most legacy giving opportunities that any manager might have, because they can potentially bring about the very best in the people that work for them when those people didn't realize that they had that very best in them in the first place.
Right.
And that is so, so exciting, And
Yeah.
on the neuroscience front of things, there's a big um, impact on the human brain when we're interacting and engaging with someone else who we know really believes in us.
Right.
There's a lot of research here, you might even relate to it yourself.
Yes.
When you are working with someone that holds you in high regard or in high esteem or truly values what you bring to the table, you're actually more inclined to do a better job.
Yes. Absolutely.
And what
I
a fantastic thing for a manager to be able to do, for one
exactly.
human to be able to do to another human.
Yeah, and that's something, from my perspective as an educator, we had I had to keep, top of mind. I
Yeah,
didn't want to let a student think that I didn't think that they could do something,
right.
because that whether I thought they could or not, you know, the j that really affects, like you said, how they viewed themselves, how much effort they were gonna put into it, and
Yeah,
how they viewed actually moving forward.
yeah, absolutely. I've done many things that I never thought I could ever possibly do,
Yeah,
but someone else believed in me enough to believe that I could do it, and you know what? I did.
exactly.
And I just think for me, those individuals are amongst the most amazing human beings walking this planet, and I will be forever thankful, to them because they saw something in me that I didn't, at least initially. I surprised myself. Maybe I surprised them, I don't know. But whatever happened, it worked.
It's so, well, that really kinda goes to one of the pieces in your book that really kinda resonated with me,
Mhm.
where you talked about, the most important skills, um, for being a manager,
Yeah,
is communication, collaboration, emotional intelligence, and the whole idea of innovation and leadership, and as I was reading and thinking about it, I don't know that you could have one if you don't have the others.
right. They definitely overlap
Yeah,
in quite significant ways. I agree.
you know, and getting back to what we started with, the whole idea that it's about the people, it's about the relationships, it's about knowing them, and making sure that there's that connection, finding that commonality and building that relationship. That is, to me, that's the real battle, because uh, uh, unless you're an architect, unless you're a surgeon,
Mm,
a rocket scientist, what we do is, it's not rocket science. I say that it's about building connections, building relationships, and
yeah.
once you do that, everything else takes care of itself.
Yeah, I think one thing that's fascinating for me about the role of a manager is most of us at some point in our lives have a manager,
Yes.
you know, at some point, all of us have parents too. I
Yes.
believe our parents are often our first managers,
Yes, they are.
in life, and they're the ones that we learn a lot from and ultimately, kind of enable us to become who we are. And I believe managers have the opportunity and have as significant impact in some respects as
Absolutely.
parents
Yes.
do.
When you look at the functions of management, they're doing all of it,
Yeah,
whether we realize it or not. Now, once you become a grandparent, you don't have to do any of that stuff. You just get to have fun
that's
and
right.
and have extra sugar.
It's all ice cream and candy.
Exactly. Exactly.
Can absolutely relate to that as well. But
But
I think people maybe, I would hope that people start taking the role of a manager in a much more serious light and that it's actually eventually given the kudos and the credence, if that's the right word,
mhm.
to be to be understood as a very significant role in someone's life, and for people to take to make a much more conscious decision to become a manager, knowing all of the complexities, many of which we've touched on today, that go into the role, and do so before they dive in.
Yes. And so you don't wake up one day and not have any idea what's going on, and you have your whole team, breathing down your neck because you
Right?
because you're
You know?
micromanaging somebody.
Exactly, and it's so easy for, good people to find themselves in situations where they might be labeled as bad managers, and I don't want that to happen to any of your listeners today, Tim.
Yes.
I don't believe I believe that we're all good people out there, but I do think that sometimes good people find themselves in challenging situations and they struggle out of them, and particularly as it relates to a management role, they struggle out of them in ways that can potentially be detrimental to other people.
Yes.
So I don't want that to happen to any of your listeners, and, obviously that's why I wrote the book.
Well, that your book, again, I talked about this, before we came online here.
Mm,
I think it's a perfect tool to for people to who are in this position to go through and actually uh, use it to get better now, right?
yes.
It's not something where you read the whole thing and then 2 weeks later you start working on things. You could pick up pretty much anywhere in your book, read that chapter and start improving. I mean, there's steps in there to help people improve, today from the
Yeah.
time you read the book.
I structured the book so that, you can read the whole thing, of course, but at the end of each chapter, there's a reader's quest. So this
Yes.
is where the game on element, right? We don't have chapters, we have quests.
Right.
So even if folks just read the quests, they would get a general summary of everything that was mentioned throughout the chapter. And I think one of the main elements of the book is the assessment that I created that helps folks assess against what I've identified as the key management skills, where they're at now
Right.
so that they can start to identify where their strengths are now and also, areas that they might want to work on. The book is definitely the what of management, Tim. It's not the how, because that would
Right.
be 10 books,
Right.
if not more. But it will give some folks some definite insight into the role. And as a result of that, too, on my website, which I know we'll talk about later, but I created an assessment that folks can go on and do an online assessment around that content. But they can also get other people to assess their capabilities as it relates to those key management skills as well in a 360 kind of format, like we talked about before. And, my hope is from that, again, they'll get an idea of where they're at now and what they need to do moving forward to become even better.
Yeah, and I think the whole idea of the 360 assessment is critical for learning because we as individuals can fill out what we think we are. But again, if that's not how we're coming across, if that's not how we're being viewed, that's not how we're being perceived, then it doesn't really matter. We're not we could be working on all the wrong things.
Absolutely. And that's where I think managers need to continuously, it's a lifelong learning journey,
Yeah.
continuously be curious about how what they're doing is perceived. Other people's perceptions, whether we agree with them or not, are real.
Yes.
And the only way that we change another person's perception of us is to change our behavior.
Yes.
And we can't change our behavior until we know what other people's perceptions are. So
Exactly.
it's important to get there. And that's again, the neuroscience of it, Tim, that, other people are always looking at us and our behavior by kind of interpreting or predicting who and what we are. And
Right.
they're constantly looking to be proven correct.
Yes.
So even if we do change something about our behavior, just changing it once or twice is not going to change another person's perspective of us. It's something that we need to integrate into who we are and our behavior every single time
Right.
in order for them to go, oh wow, maybe Joanne has changed. She's now doing this and she's not doing that.
Yeah. And with that 360, today most people aren't willing to just come out and say what's on their mind about how you're doing things, how you're treating them. It
Right.
kinda gives them a little bit of freedom to be honest without feeling like they're, everyone's quote, attacking somebody or putting somebody down. It's, this is truly how I see you coming across without
Yeah.
the guilt of saying
Yeah.
you're doing without the guilt of saying you're doing it wrong.
Right. But I also, and I also think it's an important trait for managers to continually be going out there, whether it's with a
Yes.
360 or not, and being curious around their behavior and the impact that it
Right.
has. And I find that, I myself, when I have a team reporting to me, often on our one-on-ones, I would say, "Hey, how's my management style working for you? What are you liking about it? And what might I do differently moving forward in order for us to have, a more productive, better, you fill in the blank kind of relationship?" And 9 times out of 10 initially, Tim, they're like, "No, it's great. You're fantastic. Excellent. Just keep it going." It's like, okay, well, if I keep asking the question, and this is, maybe I'll get more information. And I
Right.
think people will tend to open up if managers have that perspective when they're asking these kinds of questions. And then when they are given information that they maybe don't like or weren't expecting, or that might come across as a little bit of a
Mhm.
criticism, don't take it personally.
Don't take it personally.
Just be appreciative of that feedback, because now they can act on it.
Yes.
Now they know about it. I think people often feel, well, there's a lot of research into this as well, that people actually prefer the negative feedback to the positive feedback sometimes. I
Yes.
use a ratio of 1 to 3. So for every piece of um, uh, every 3 pieces of positive reinforcement or positive feedback, I usually give one negative or one constructive, because I think doing and communicating that way with my team creates a balance. They know where they stand. They know fundamentally, I know that they're doing a great job. And here's a couple of other areas, or areas that I think that they can improve on. And delivering feedback in that way just comes across as a lot more authentic,
Yes.
a lot more real. And honestly, Tim, 9 times out of 10, when I give someone some feedback that might come across as negative feedback or criticism, they will often turn to me and say, "Oh, wow, I'm so glad that you told me that. Thank you. I
Right.
wasn't aware of the impact that I was having. Now I know it. I can change it, and I can, be better, do better, whatever." So, but it's all in how you give the feedback, and that's where,
Yes.
how to give feedback effectively. Training is super important for folks as well, because you want to leave people feeling like that you truly care about
Y
their growth and development,
yeah,
not that you're trying to criticize them.
for me, as when I was much younger, that was definitely an area that I needed, help and improvement on because I'm generally a pretty direct, and I would just,
Right.
uh, and so I laugh because that was definitely an area that I was I was told almost immediately I had to, improve on,
Right.
so
Yeah, it's interesting. I've come across people in the past that have said, "Well, that's just how I am. I'm direct, kind of deal with it." And as a manager, you have some authority there. You have some
right.
power associated with your position. So for just to go out and say, "Well, deal with it. That's just me." For my mind, that's not enough.
Right.
Managers have an obligation to do more in that respect, and to make their communication and how they're coming across much better, in a way that engages folks, rather than and builds people up rather than tear people down.
Exactly. Well, Joanne, thank you so much for your time today. Where can people buy your book, and where can, they find you to work with you?
Oh, thank you. Well, they can find my website, which is theleadershiprecipe.com. That's where they can also get access to that assessment that I talked about earlier, and they can get my book from there as well. But I am on Amazon, and the title is Game On: Is Management Your Best Career Play? And I truly hope that folks enjoy the book, that they get a lot out of it, and that it enables them to create the best possible legacy that they might, and be the best possible managers that they can be.
Well, again, I think the book is a tremendous tool, and I'm sure that those that buy it and go through it we'll get a ton out of it and get better from that perspective. But I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too.
I, uh, I can't wait till we can connect again. And again, thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Be sure to visit speakingwithconfidencepodcast.com to get your free ebook, Top 21 Challenges for Public Speakers and How to Overcome Them. You can also register for the Formula for Public Speaking course. Always remember, your voice has the power to change the world. We'll talk to you next time. Take care.